Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to proceed. Ladies and gentlemen, I have consulted the earlier mentioned Latin teacher, Kevin Hawkeye Carroll, who has given me this: Gubernator non eravit. The governor did not make a mistake. It's time now to hear the response to the governor's toast, and who better to deliver it than Alastair Clarkson, the man who keeps on delivering. Without wanting to embarrass Alistair with too rhapsodic an introduction, I don't want to understate his achievement either. And perhaps it's most neatly put this way. Prior to Hawthorn's third straight flag last year, 5 men in history had coached premiership hat-tricks. 3 of them, Jock McHale, Norm Smith and Lee Matthews, are legends of the Hall of Fame. The other 2, Checker Hughes and Jack Worrell, were inaugural inductees in 1996. Beyond that statement of fact, and with the Hawks again in contention this year, I'll leave consideration of the possibilities to you. What I will say, unabashed, is that these Hawthorn teams have consistently provided the best football to watch I've seen in my decades as an observer. This is a coach who not only knows how to win, but also how to nurture the game in a thoroughly modern way. Please welcome Alastair Clarkson to respond to the toast of football.
Never been introduced in that manner before. Thanks, Tim. Nearly brought a tear to my eye. Little country boy from Conniva. I think we should acknowledge the governor. She's been a first at many things. One of the first women judges, one of the first women commissioners, the first women speaker at this fantastic night. First governor for Victoria as a woman. I was given lots of advice in the last 40 minutes. Good luck. I hope yours is as flawless as hers. Which included her husband, who is sitting next to me. Good luck, don't stuff it up. I think to myself, well, it's going to be tough, but I think we need to acknowledge Linda and the magnificent contribution that she's made. In 3 fields, obviously in the legal fraternity, obviously with football, and now, I'm not sure as governor, what do you call it? Is it politics? No, she wouldn't like to be called politics. I've got to know Linda and Tony particularly well over the last 6 or 8 years in particular, and we were very fortunate to spend a night at the governor's house earlier this year. She spoke about owls and foxes, and we didn't see the owl, but she did tell me that there was this owl that had landed, and she very unnerving because it just sits and stares at her. Doesn't move too much, the owl. So but strangely enough, as we were leaving that particular evening, and there was the Newbolts, the Langfords, the Clarksons as guests that night, and we're leaving this magnificent house, and there was these foxes running through the grounds of Government House, and I made comment of the foxes and the owls, and that was a little bit of the story that Linda was speaking about. But in being a little bit flustered about seeing these foxes, because I'm a country boy, when you see a fox, you shoot it. And these are just running around like dogs in your backyard. And in acknowledging Linda and thanking her for the evening, she will recall this. I'm not really proud to acknowledge this to everyone in the room, but I said, thanks so much for the evening, old timer. And she did remind me that you shouldn't be talking to the governor in that sort of fashion. I've got some things I want to talk about in terms of football. It's a great game. I've been involved with the game for a long, long period of time. I've also been very, very fortunate over the last 15 years in particular to travel abroad a lot. And I've witnessed a lot of great games in world sport, but I'm still yet to see a game as great as Australian rules football. I'm a little bit biased, I might add. But part of the reason our game is great, I want you to consider these things. Linda spoke about the oval ball, and I too would love to see the bounce retained in the game, because it is part of preserving the history of our game that I think is important. It's an oval-shaped ball. If you want to make everything predictable, then let's go to a round-shaped ball, but that is the part of the game that is a great feature of our game. So let's bounce it, and if it favours one team, bad luck. Because over the course of a period of time, you'd get 50-50. So there's some things about our game that we want to preserve, but the challenge of our game is it's an oval ball. You can tackle in our game nearly from any direction, nearly at any time, which is very unusual compared to a lot of sports around the world. Rugby, for instance, and gridiron are mainly tackled from the front, so you can see the contact coming. So you need to be very, very courageous to play our game. But there's three significant variables in addition to those first two that I just spoke about. And that is that our game is played on the biggest surface of any ballistic ball sport in the world. It's played over the longest period of time, and it's played with the most amount of participants on the field at any point in time. Now, when you put all those five variables together, it is an unbelievably complex game to play. It is an unbelievably complex game to coach. It is an unbelievably complex game to umpire, which is why all of us in the room, particularly me, at different stages are just pulling our hair out about the way that the game is adjudicated. But it is a very, very complex game, given all the variables that I've spoken about. And we need to make sure that there's some things about our game that we preserve, and there's some things about our game that we try to create opportunity for. Our game is very unique to Australia. And perhaps the only thing that's changed in our game in the last little while, actually before I reveal that, I'll speak about an observation I've got of world sport. World sport and the way that the game evolves, whether it's to do with tactics, whether it's to do with culture, whether it's to do with values and the way that people view their game. A lot of these sports that are played in other countries around the world are global sports. Basketball, water polo, the world game, soccer in particular. And what usually happens if you take, for example, soccer and the World Cup held every 4 years, and the Brazilians win the World Cup. They play a very, very attacking brand of football. And that's all about their culture, because Brazil, a very, very different culture than the way that football is played in Europe and the way that people are brought up in Europe. But Brazil win the World Cup, and so everyone thinks to themselves for the next 3 to 4 years, geez, we've got to play really attacking, one-touch football, and everyone tries to copy the Brazilians until the World Cup of 4 years later, and the Italians win the World Cup. Dour, shitty, 1-0, boring. But what happens? Because it's successful, heaven forbid everyone tries to copy the Italians and they play the game that way. Our game here, because it's unique to Australia, it hasn't expanded beyond our shores too far, hasn't had that type of infiltration into the game. It's not influenced by significant culture. We're trying to do it now. Multicultural academies, great. But the most significant thing that's happened in our game in the last 30 years that can somehow compare to what's going on overseas is the injection of Indigenous talent into our game. We've seen it at Hawthorn in the last 10 years. And we saw it with Sheeds in particular. I can remember Sid Jackson as one of the first. I was just a young kid in the 70s, and Sid Jackson was one of the first Aboriginal players that I could remember. There was obviously some earlier than that, like Sir Doug Nichols and others, but Sid Jackson was the first Aboriginal player that I could recall. And there was Sid James as an umpire. I could recall him in the 70s as well. But then the 80s came along. The Cracker Brothers, Morris Rioli. And it was just like, wow, these boys can bring something really, really special to our game. And I'm embarrassed to say it now, I grew up in Conniva, little Western Victorian town, last town on the way to Adelaide before you hit the border. And just before you get to Conniva, there's a town called Dimboola. And that was my first initiation into Aboriginal culture. And there was an Aboriginal tribe or group of people that lived on the banks of the Wimmera River in Dimboola. And we used to play against the Suns in junior football, and they were aggressive, they were violent, they were downright scary. And we used to call them terrible names because that was the culture right there. I'm embarrassed to say it now. Until I got to North Melbourne, and I was playing with the Cracker Brothers and Derek Kickett, and then I got the opportunity to go to Port Adelaide and be involved with guys like Sean and Peter Burgoyne and Gavin Wanganeen and these type of guys, and then get to Hawthorn and have just such special talent like Buddy Franklin, Cyril Rioli, Sean Burgoyne again, Chance Bateman, who is an absolute star and has been so important to the culture of our footy club, both from an Aboriginal point of view but also from a white man's point of view too. Just the integration between the two, he was so significant to the culture of our club. And so the challenge for our game, in a sense, is how can we continue to explore? How can we continue to go beyond the boundaries of just Australia? And we've started with these academies overseas. And it's such an important part of our game in terms of growing it, because we need to show, because of those variables I spoke about earlier on, the amount of participants on the ground, the length of time that the game is played. And people around the world, we speak at conferences in North America or Europe, and they say, how far do these guys run each game? And say, well, some of the midfielders have run up to 20 kilometres a game. 20 kilometres. 20 kilometres a game, and they're getting belted as well from all angles. They don't wear pads. And so these same things, and they're just astounding. How many games do you play for a season? It's like 22 plus finals plus pre-season games. You know, when you're speaking to the North Americans, and it's just like they play 16 games, and they hit each other hard. But their game goes for a certain period of time, and depending on whether you're on the offensive line or the defensive line, or you're on special teams, you might only play for a third of the game. A third of the game. Our blokes have to do everything. We've got interchange, but geez, by and large, the majority of players play 80 to 85% of the game. I remember going and spending some time with the San Antonio Spurs 2 years ago, and it was the day of a game. It was a season opener against the, I think it was Oklahoma Thunder. And they said, it was myself and Chris Fagan from Hawthorn who were visiting the Spurs, and they said, do you want to come to a little bit of a shoot around on the Saturday morning? I said, oh, you know, their training facility was about half an hour out of town. Thinking, oh, it's just shoot around on a Saturday morning. They're not going to be doing too much. And so we thought, well, geez, we've come all the way from Australia to go to San Antonio, so we might as well go out there. So we went out there, and they proceeded to train for half an hour to 45 minutes, and flat out, up and down the court, and beads of sweat. They're playing that night. I'm thinking to myself, ignorantly really, geez, how do they do this? But then it tweaked. Their players play for 28, their best players play for 28 to 32 minutes of the game and subbed off. And so sit there and say, geez, how do they play? You know, we got the NBA Finals right at the moment. It's going to be Game 3 tomorrow morning. I'll be sitting there watching it with Big Ruffy, who's a big, keen NBA fan. But the game itself is so quick. But because of that, they can only play for very, very short periods of time. Our game, it's quick too. But the way that it's structured, we demand that our players play much, much greater periods of time. And unlike American football, they've got to do everything. They've got to be special teams, which are stoppages in a sense. They've got to be really, really good on offence, and they've got to be really good on defence. Enormously complex game. How can we show the world, though? How can we show the world? Because at the moment, not enough people know about Australia. They're starting to acknowledge, gee whiz, these guys, to be able to play this game, to be able to coach this game, to be able to condition the players to play this game, there must be something special about these people. So they're starting to take notice. But we need to get the game overseas somehow. And so the international academies are a great step towards that. The continued injection of Aboriginal talent is another way of doing that. That's happened in America with the African Americans who have just infiltrated both gridiron and basketball in that country. And it's just outstanding that they've been able to continue to grow their games because of the people that they bring in, the multiculturalism of those people. And our country is very, very multicultural now, and we need to embrace that, but use it as an opportunity of how can we expand the game. And I'm talking about 50, 70, 100 years from now. I'm not talking about bringing in a team from New Zealand in the next 3 years. That's just not going to happen. What we need to be really, really careful of, however, is the things that we need to preserve about our game. The bounce, the tackle, the bumps gone from footy. We could argue whether that's right or wrong. But there's some things about our game that we need to preserve. Part of that thing that we need to preserve is the grassroots area of the gems of our game. I came from a little place called Conniva, as I mentioned before. In a 10-year period, there was 4 players that went on to play VFL, AFL footy in a 10-year period from 77 to 87. I was one of them. The 3 others were John Barnes, Roger Merritt and Glenn Hawker. Now, all 4 of those guys have been, speaking about those guys, I'm one of them, but all four from the little place, there's less than 1,000 people that live in Conniva, and 4 players in a 10-year period went on not just to play a game. 4 people from that little town went on to play in premierships and be involved in the game for all 4 of them beyond a decade. Pretty significant. Since we went from a zone, which was Essendon, we lived in Essendon zone, and we're this really nurturing academy type of system. And if you think what's happening around the land now, and clubs like Hawthorn, shitty as all buggery that other teams have got academies and we haven't. Life is about academies. Business is about academies. Families is about academies. Sport is about academies. What is it about academies? Bringing in young people, nurturing them through fault and good work, and then having stability and continuity and giving them support. We've lost that by going to a national draft. Now, there's very, very good things about a national draft, but the thing that's happened since we've gone to a national draft, not one player has been drafted out of Conniva. Now, is that coincidence? It's not been since 1987 that the player has come out of Conniva. Now, if you look at Tasmanian football right at this point in time, where's Tim? We've got an under-18 championship at the moment, and there's the Vic Metro side, there's a Vic Country side, there's a South Oz side, there's a Western Australian side, and they're all in Division 1, and they've made up an Allies team. And that Allies team is made up of Northern Territory players, Queensland players, New South Welsh players, am I allowed to say that? New South Wales, ACT and Tasmania. 0. At under 18 level, there is 0 players from Tasmania in that side. That's an indictment. That's an indictment on the growth and development of our game. That is football heartland in Tasmania. And you think of some of the players that have come out of that state, And we're saying to ourselves, well, we've got a new team in Queensland, a new team in New South Wales. Tim, you'll be loving this. Somehow we can sustain a team in provincial Victoria like Geelong because they've been in the competition a bloody long time, but we can't work out how we can't put a team in Tassie, which has been the heartland of our game for over 100 years and has produced so many outstanding players. And we've got to take my team and now another team in the Kangaroos into that area to sustain footy just for this period, because that's a good alternative. We've got to find ways to preserve what is so important. We want to grow. We want to grow as a game, without a doubt. And that means pushing beyond our boundaries. But we can't ignore the absolute heartland of our game. Little places like Canaiva, little places like Mildura and Swan Hill, Bairnsdale, that have been such a fantastic breeding ground for the people in our game, whether that be players, whether that be administrators, whether that be members and supporters. People that love our game. The heartland is here in the southern states. We're growing that into the northern states. Very, very important. I'm not suggesting that we don't put teams into New South Wales. I'm not suggesting we don't put teams in Queensland and grow the game. In fact, eventually, I'd love to see the game played beyond the shores of our country. But we can't also ignore what has created our game in the first instance. And that is what our society is built on, what I spoke about before. Families are based on academies. That nurturing. So are businesses, and heaven forbid, football. I think, Carolyn, you might be able to help me here. I can recall in the either late 60s or early 70s when there was under 17s, under 19s, reserves and seniors. I think in one particular year, Richmond won all four. That was a long time ago, Tiger fans. But I think Kevin Bartlett came through that process. I think he started as a 14-year-old. And for me, that is the fabric of our game. It's people coming into the game as a young person and then growing with that club. Unfortunately, we've got kids at under 18 level now who are going through their final year of schooling, and if they're good enough to be representing their state, at 17 years of age, right on the edge of getting drafted, they've got to go through all things that 17-year-olds have to go through in terms of school and, in some cases, drinking alcohol and all sorts of things. It's happening at 17, 18 years of age. But in terms of their football, they might be playing for their school at Haileybury College. They might be playing for their under-18s team at the Sandringham Dragons. They might be playing for their Vic Metro team. And they may also be in the Australian Institute of Sport squad. Who the hell is that kid going to listen to? Which one of the 4 coaches? Which one of the 4 fitness advisors? Which one of the 4 doctors? It's enormously tough. And so we've got to preserve the game in terms of what is the best pathway. I can remember years and years ago, Dave Matthews ironically came out to Hawthorn. He was involved in development at the AFL at that point in time, and he said, blank sheet of paper. Here's what our focus today is on what's the best pathway for football. It's just like, well, this is fantastic. I'm rubbing my hands together saying beauty. Because we know what the best pathway is. It's nurturing talent from a young age. It's what the Sydney Swans, GWS, Brisbane and Gold Coast are getting the opportunity to do right now. And it is gold. It is gold. It is the best way to nurture and develop talent. In whatever field you want to, whether it's sport or any other field, best way to nurture talent. Sit with this blank sheet of paper, and Dave says to us, okay, what do you think? I said, well, we've got to go back to the under-19s reserve seniors. So we've got to piss off Williamstown and Frankston and Port Melbourne and those teams out of the competition in the VFL and have a nurturing system like it used to be. Oh, we can't do that. I said, well, it's not a blank sheet of paper. The meeting's over. As harsh as it is, the meeting's over right now because we're looking for the best pathway for our sport, and we had it. We had it. And I'm not suggesting that the draft isn't a really, really good mechanism. How do we find a mechanism where we have a draft and a set of academies that we can do both? It's a challenge, I know. But in America, that we're basing our model on in a sense with the draft, in America, there's 38 million people just in California. So Stanford University, when they're recruiting their players, and they don't go through a draft process with the college system, but they go out to recruit. And they start with a funnel system where they've got 1,000 kids and they bring it right down to here. And they screen them to the point where if you got caught pinching a matchy car out of a milk bar when you were 13 years of age or 10 years of age, then you're not getting drafted or you're not going to enter Stanford University. That's how stringent they become. Why? Because there's 38 million, and that's just in California. We've got 25 million here in our whole country. So it's a different system. And we had a really, really strong nurturing system that was the fabric of our game, and we've just moved away from it. With good reason, I understand, but we need to make sure that there's some things in our game that we preserve, because there's some areas like Western Victoria, far Western Victoria, far northwestern Victoria. When was the last time you heard of a player coming from Portland or Hamilton or Mildura or Coniva or Bairnsdale? It's just not happening in Tasmania. This is the heartland of our game. This is meant to be a toast, Linda, isn't it? I am toasting our game in a great sense because we've got a fantastic opportunity to really, really grow the game, but we've also got a fantastic opportunity to reunite with the people that have made our game great in the first place. And that is those regions. And if we do it well, we'll continue to grow this great game, and we'll have greater opportunity to even expand it further with the type of fabric of people that have become galvanised. I'll tell a little story about Jared Ruffhead just in closing. He's going through a really, really tough time, and for those close to him at our club, it's a tough time for us too. But this is an example of how a community galvanises when blokes are going through tough times. On Sunday afternoon, St Kilda are playing Adelaide at Adelaide Oval, and there's a young player in the St Kilda side called Hugh Goddard who ruptures his Achilles in the game. And within 24 hours, and I'm not certain of the exact time, whether it was by the time he got back into the change rooms or whether it was that night or whether it was the next morning, but it was within 24 hours, there's a text message from Jared Ruffhead to Hugh Goddard. Why? Because Jared Ruffhead had ruptured his Achilles out here in 2011 against the Kangaroos. That, for me, is the essence of football in our great country. That despite the competitiveness, and probably an example is that is myself and Dimmer, who are great mates. He's probably my closest mate in footy, but come game day, we are trying to beat the shit out of each other. But as soon as the siren is sounded for the end of the game, we are best mates again. And that is the essence of our game. And we can't lose that. And at different stages with trying to make the game equal and trying to have every team win 11 games and lose 11 games, and all these equalisation policies that are just being compromised everywhere in the game, sometimes we lose sight of what is the fabric of the game. And that is our people, whether it's the ones who play the game or whether it's the ones that love the game in terms of its support. We can never lose sight of those people and their importance to our game. And if we get that part of it right, that gives us the best opportunity to grow it into the future. And who knows what that does for our game in terms of where it can grow and where it can go to. Thanks so much for your toast, Linda. Someone did mention to me that it's much better to do the toast at the start, because when you do the toast and raise your glass, everyone stands, and no matter what happens, whether you've been shit or not, you get a standing ovation. So that's why I'm going to ask everyone to stand, grab a glass. Let's have a little bit of a sip, and then I'll go and sit at my table. Thank you. Cheers.
Well, I don't know about you, but I loved that, particularly certain parts of it. Ladies and gentlemen, to formally thank our toast mistress and our responder, please welcome the President of the Melbourne Cricket Club, former Demon Giant, Stephen Smith.
I really do love this night. It's one of the best nights on the club's calendar, and it's for the footy purist. It's pretty special when you can get the Governor of Victoria and the best AFL coach in the business sharing their inner thoughts with you. It doesn't get much better than that. And I've got to say, Governor and Alistair, that was very special. And I've thought in the last few years we've had some fantastic speakers, but I can't ever think that we'll ever reach that again. But again, tonight has been fantastic. So thank you both so much. The Governor, I can't believe it's only been less than 12 months since you've been Governor. You seem to be everywhere. You're the busiest person I know, but I love listening to the Governor speak because she's always upbeat. She's always energised. She's got that big smile. She's got that very sharp sense of humour. But you get a feeling, a genuine feeling that she really enjoys what she's doing. But tonight, more obviously, you get the feeling that she loves her footy. Not just because she's on the commission for 8 years, not just because she was at Essendon, but there's a deep, deep passion for the game. I remember reading an article a couple of years ago where the Governor was quoted as saying that she and Tony love going to the footy with their family because for 3 hours they all have the undivided attention of each other, and it's a very, very special time. And I know I can relate to that, and I'm sure most of us can. It just shows that deep down she genuinely loves her footy. So I'd like to thank you, Governor. From a slight housekeeping point of view, the MCG's got the cheapest food going around. You should get Essendon to play more home games here because we sell so many hot chips that we've had to buy more fat cookers. They can't make enough chips, so we're doing our bit for cheap food here. Also, thank you for sharing your inner thoughts. In many ways, unfortunately, the people of Victoria's gain is AFL footy's loss, because I have absolutely no doubt that if you'd stayed on the commission, you would be the first AFL chairman, because you genuinely love and know the game so well. But, as you said, being the Governor's a demotion and AFL's a promotion, so maybe it's the next phase in your life after this one. So thank you again. Alistair, I think as the Governor rightly said, he's got the big smile, he's got that very cheeky smile, but there is a tad more complex than the Governor in lots of ways. We see more of the glare, I guess, that gets the press from time to time, intimidates the press. But tonight showed just what a deep thinker Alistair really is about the game. It's hard to think that 12 years ago his choice as coach of the Hawthorn Footy Club was questioned by nearly everybody because they didn't know who he was. And now he's the benchmark for every AFL club. He's regarded really now as one of the best coaches in the last 30 years. And you can see from tonight he's fiercely competitive, he's incredibly astute, and such a deep thinker that he cares about the game and cares about his people. I understand from Hawthorn that he invests a lot emotionally in his players, in his team, and through that they're very incredibly loyal to Alistair. He'd show tough love, but you can sense that he cares so much about what he's doing and who plays for him. So, again, thank you so much, Alistair. Good luck for the year ahead, although I think most of us in the room would say a gallant second would be just fine this year. Although, listening to you and knowing how fiercely competitive you are, I'm sure that's not going to be the case if you can help it. So thank you both so much again. In fact, if you could both come up to the stage just for a small presentation. So please join me in a round of applause for our two guests.
Those are the formalities for the night, ladies and gentlemen. Dessert and coffee is about to come. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. I'm sure you've enjoyed tonight. Make sure you come back and we'll produce another record crowd next year. Thank you.